first of all, number one is the limitations on getting older, limitations due to age, injuries, chronic conditions. I don't like to use the word old. I prefer the word experienced. To me, old is a state of mind or lack thereof, or openness. But anyway, so we're starting off with Lonnie, and want to start off again?
Okay, yeah. I said briefly is that I'm turning a ripe old age. Now I don't have to say the number and be broadcast worldwide. But no, I'll be turning 70 in August. So I'm somewhat mature. But my limitations are based on my history from youth to complete tear of my ACL to kind of a repetitive motion in terms of throwing. Some of it was done before I really perfected the throw, so it was not the best leverage compared to, as I got older, a better throwing a mechanism. So just the body, the weariness of the body, which puts me in danger and potentially puts the person who is being thrown, the uke, in danger of throw if it's an unstable throw. I also mentioned that I'm finding on the other ends of the age scale is on the student age. Our students are affected by the mixed martial arts, which is not a lot of throwing. So when you talk about throwing, they're like looking with, oh, is this going to hurt? Or shying away from it to some degree until it's, oh, this is not as bad as I thought. But
okay, anybody want to respond to what Lonnie has said, or thoughts, or?
So let me jump in. This is Gary, real quick. Yeah, throwing, if you can tumble, you can be thrown. You don't get hurt. You get knocked over, you just tumble around. But so many places don't teach that. My hardest problem is finding anybody to play with. They are not there anymore.
That's right. I agree. I agree.
I agree with that. It's hard to find someone remotely similar age. The other issue is sometimes the person just knowledge-wise is not where you're at, or they don't have the same background you have. Okay, and so that causes some issues. Those issues can be worked out. Finding a place to train or work out can be an issue. It's up here, the ground is extremely hard. We use dynamite for if you want to plant a tree, put a stick of dynamite in the ground and you have a chance. Yeah, there are a lot of problems that confront us as we get older, and the COVID thing certainly hasn't helped matter. Anybody else want to provide anything in here?
I can.
Let's give this another sense of direction. You as a sensei, okay, are there things you have changed in how you teach or how you interact with your students because of either your age or injuries you've received? Don't want to really deal with the inexperience of new students that don't know how to throw properly yet or fall properly. But this is more of a instructor issue question. So have any of you done any modifications to the way you teach, or?
I'm not a head sensei, but I can speak for a head sensei whom I've worked with for a long time. His background is more in the Korean and Chinese arts, and his study of so many arts has encompassed the very hard martial arts like Taekwondo and karate, which involve mainly punching and kicking, but also the softer arts. And as he's gotten up into his 60s, he's gravitated more to the softer arts. I think in part just because they're more complementary to his age, and he's not as interested in using very high kicks.
I'll be safe out there.
Yeah, but also there's a major qigong component in his teaching, and that's become more significant as he's gotten older. And there's this more kind of healing quality that goes beyond just martial arts self-defense practice, where it's self-developmental and health oriented. So I think if your exposure and training has been broad enough, you can just emphasize different aspects of training in your history and evolve as you get older to things that you prefer.
Anybody want to comment on? I mean, I've moved more. I mean, I've been solely traditional jiu-jitsu all my martial arts career experience, and I know for a fact that over the years I've tended more towards the quote unquote gentler aspects of it. And have any of you kind of started that segue over, or?
I have, Professor, what Tom's talking about. Of course, my mother art is Kung Fu, but I came to Jiu-Jitsu in the early 90s. But I have found myself more and more drawn to Tai Chi, to Qigong. And I'm always trying, not always, but ideally I would always think of how can I connect these internal energy cultivating arts with my Jiu-Jitsu. And what I've noticed in my teaching is I'm trying to give my students the benefit of having thought about this for 3 decades. How would I add that in for them? And I'm also, so for example, I have all of my children. All of my children are my students. And so that ranges from 24 down to 10, all my kids. And I look at my boys in particular, my 13 and 10-year-old, and I think, how can I teach them today so that when they're my age, they're not dealing with constant repetitive injuries?
Meditating?
No, but on a seminar.
Lonnie,
I'm sorry.
Lonnie, do you think you could mute yourself? We're getting a lot of, yeah, cool. Thanks.
There we go. So I'm thinking, how can I teach my kids or my younger students so that in 30 years they're not sidelined by every little thing, which I'm dealing with now. And a lot of it is because I didn't integrate the internal arts until later. And I just didn't do jiu-jitsu well early on, but I did it. But it was a real hard style. So I think there's some of what Tom's talking about that I'm finding more appropriate for me.
Okay, any other?
I'm gonna get kind of out of here. Watch out.
Yeah, so I mean, I'll jump in here. So I am the ripe young age of 37, but after 25 years of martial arts, I've already had 2 hip surgeries, and shoulder surgery, and knee surgery. And so, you know, getting up in the morning is more like a kind of like starting up an old car engine. Takes a little bit for me to warm up and then, you know, get moving. Sorry, one second. My kids are here. So one of the things that I've noticed as an instructor is that when I'm teaching, my home art is Kajikembo, and I'm now starting to get into the jiu-jitsu. But one of the things that I've noticed is that my physical limitations, my students are copying them, thinking that's the right way to do things. And that has been quite a challenge for me, because as soon as I noticed it, I kept thinking, what are you guys doing? That's not the right way to do it. And then I looked in the mirror and I did it and I went, oh boy, that's because I can't move a certain way anymore. And they're seeing that and they're copying me. I found that to be, that was quite an awakening for me, where now I have to really push myself through my pain in order to teach them properly. And that goes into my throws, that goes into stances. And so, yeah, you know, when everyone's talking about moving into the softer arts, I agree, because I can't kick like I used to. I can't, you know, I can't take a hard fall like I used to. So yeah, I just wanted to comment on that. I agree with what I've heard so far, and that's kind of the direction I'm moving as well.
One of the things that I've always studied Chinese martial arts, kung fu, but again, one of those modifications is that as my limitations have increased, I've also migrated to the softer arts, particularly Tai Chi, as an exercise. And so, I prior to COVID, I worked with the senior group, which I'm a part of, but going to two senior centers and doing Tai Chi as a wellness activity, and also doing that at the Y as a wellness activity, and that's also for a course at the hospital as a wellness. So not only for me, it works for me, but it also is good in terms of my instructional practice, in terms of working with others who are mature adults.
Mature adults.
Old.
We call them seasoned and broken in.
For seasoned and broken in, but we're not.
There are plenty of immature adults.
Yeah. So if I might comment to Ephraim's point, I've recently in the last year been, one of my jiu-jitsu students teaches Salat and Bukta Nagara. And in learning the particular style of Bukta Nagara that he teaches, all of the fundamental, what are essentially katas, they're called juras, are based on a particular stance that the founder adopted because he was crippled on the right side. And so everything is this movement. Ephraim shaking his head. And at first I said, why the particular movement? And then he said, because the guy that taught it was crippled. And so everything is based on, so now you have generations that have been based on the limited movement of the teacher. And that's how it's done now. It would be unorthodox not to move like that person did, which is just an interesting dynamic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead, Bobby.
I was just going to follow up on that last point is that, that is jujitsu, adaptation, the ability to adapt, but also be nimble with your adaptation in terms of conflict. But for the teaching game, which is a longer thing, getting students to understand that adapting to limited range of motion, because you don't give up your self-defense if you have if you're a broken leg or a wounded shoulder or something like that. You learn to operate with the other hand, and so it's a part of the art. It's a part of the art, being able to adapt to different situations, including age.
Right. One of my greatest frustrations thus far was I loved to do, either you can call it Sutemi Waza or Suwari Waza, techniques from a formal sitting position, which Seki basically said, because he'd have a class of 40, 50 people and maybe only 6 or 8 teams up at a time. And the rest of us were expected to be facing, while we were around the mat, facing each other in a formal sitting position, going through the kata of the technique and essentially moving around the edge of the mat. So in any case, I really enjoy doing that, because doing techniques from a formal sitting position, you have a lot more leverage. You have to be a lot more careful with your uke. But after I had my knee replacement surgery, and I cannot collapse that knee down all the way, to me, that was a real bummer for me. And I try to teach it every once in a while, but again, as Thomas has said, they tend to copy what I do rather than what I say. And because I can't go down completely on my left knee, they tend to do the techniques the same way I'm doing them. And I say, just relax, sit down. And eventually they get it, but yeah, it is really frustrating. It's, you know, it's the old saying, don't do what I do what I say. And most kids will do what their parents do rather than what their parents say. I don't know where the solution is. I in the same boat until my shoulder started bothering me significantly. I also like to do groundwork and ground submissions, but as I've said before, if I don't announce ahead of time that we're going to be doing groundwork or submissions or nerve attacks, because half the class wouldn't show up the next week for that activity because they're not used to it, they don't like it, and I think that's one of the things that we and that's one of the, how do you say, faults in my instructional format, is that I tend to do things in groups, and I'll go from one ground defense to another, and we could spend weeks on the ground, but that's not the art either. So, but that's, you know, a frustration I have, and that's, you know, partially because of the way I like to teach. If we have intersessions, I'll say, okay, I won't tell them for the next 3 weeks we're going to do groundwork because I won't have anybody there. But if I say something like, we're going to do handbow, or we're going to do koshinobo, or we're going to do flashlight defenses with flashlight, or household appliances, as I did, I think, the last seminar back east with is there anyone here? Lonnie, were you back there for the last seminar? I did it in Thomas's. There's no, where's Lonnie? Your mic is cut off.
Yes. I attended at least one with you, just some household or everyday appliance type things. Yeah.
Yeah. So, okay. Some of you are muted, but anyway, yeah, it's, I mean, sometimes you do things, I mean, as we get older, we also get bored with some of the stuff we're teaching. And so the part of the trick is to find different ways to, or different ways to teach things, or put the students in different situations. And I find that's I do that as much to keep my own interest in the art as to keep their interest in the art. What Seki used to have us do, he taught a number of techniques that are great, but one would never use on the street. And one of his nice ones, he just put dollar bills out on the mat, and he just say, have somebody, this is for a wrist grab, just for a wrist release. He'd say, grab the dollar bill. And most students would try to pull the other person's wrist rather than reach for the dollar bill. Okay. Today, I mean, the last time I did this, I ended up using $10 bills because nobody would go for the ones, you know. Inflation. But, you know, and they would, the hard part was to get them to understand the concept of reach rather than pull, because there's a different mindset there. But you find different, for me, I have to find different ways of doing the same things just for my own mental stimulation, or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, I think that's another issue. I'm getting away from the topic. At what point, it's a hard question to ask. At what point do you, I don't want to say pull the plug, or at what point do you really change either what you're going to teach or how you're going to teach because of age or injuries or what have you? Or have you ever thought of that? think
if I'm trying to get out ahead of this a little bit in the academy that I lead, and I would love to hear everyone's thought on my approach. So I'm doing two things. One, I'm making sure that we have a clearly developed dinsho, a clearly developed curriculum guide that has, this is what it should look like, clearly spelled out. And then I'm making sure that my younger and emerging leaders, and I have some sensei probably in their first degrees in their 20s and 30s and so on and higher. And I'm making sure that when a technique, when I say I want to see this demonstrated according to the dinsho, they do it. And then I've allowed myself, and this has been some swallowing of my pride, just to be frank, to say, now here's what it looks like if you have a shoulder injury, an ascending aortic aneurysm, and right now 2 herniated lower discs. And we modify. But I say, this is the technique. This is what a hurt body does with it. And the students have responded pretty well. I don't know if that's more because they're being kind to me, or if they're saying, oh, I see the adaptation. But that's how I've been doing it. And I've been reminded again and again, that dinsho is so important, because it's what really becomes the grading standard, even if I'm broke and can't do it. So
okay.
I'm curious to hear input on that.
I think it's a very valid point. I think if you're using someone else's densho or promotional criteria or what have you, and that's what you want to stick with to preserve that system, that's fine. And if it's a good way to preserve a system of teaching or an art. If you have to develop your own, that's a lot of work to set up, because you have to make decisions as to what's appropriate for students to learn at particular belt ranks or knowledge levels. And like the student handbook that I have now has probably gone through at least 10 or 15 revisions, usually based on feedback from students. The first handbook I had actually just had green belt, purple belt, and then the 3 browns, and then you're to black belt. And students were bombing on the purple belt exam all over the place. I mean, they'd have to take it 2, 3, 4 times to pass it. And at some point, I really saw it as I'm losing students. If they get past purple belt, they're fine. But weren't getting past, that was 4th Q. So one of my black belts and 2 of my brown belts, I said, I'd like you to come up. I'd like you to take the purple belt exam, which is probably the longest exam there was. And it still is, to me, it still is the most difficult exam. I say, I want you to break it, and I want you to create a 5th Q exam. It was, I'd say 6 Qs green belt, then there was 4th Q purple belt, and then 3rd Q, 2nd, 3rd brown belt. I said, I want you to create a 5th Q belt, and I want you to take half of the techniques from the purple belt and put it in the green belt. Okay. And it took them a while, but they got it, and we had to fine tune it. It took a couple of years. And so that's where the 5th Q exam. The outcome was, because they also added some belt requirements into each one. And so by the time a person finishes purple belt now, they actually know more than what they knew was under the old setup. So you have to be, once you set this thing up, you have to be able to see where there are problems and work to resolve those problems. Because you don't want to have a dead show that, or belt exams that are so difficult at one belt level that you're losing most of your students, because that's what none of us are after. None of us, I don't think, are after getting rid of students. I hope not. Our goal is we want to have that student go as far as they can go. Hopefully all of my students someday, we're all saying this, right? Hopefully all of my students will become sensei, black belts, and go out and teach the art as I taught it, or the system I taught, because then that helps you become a sensei, or what you want to call it, okay, or a legend, or and that I think is ultimately what we're all after, is to see the art grow and to have our students become sensei. So the goal of tests or evaluations, or whatever you want to call it, is actually to have students pass them. And if you're teaching properly, they will. I mean, and as far as physical limitations, I've taught with my right arm in a sling. I've taught using a cane, walking with a cane, because there was time I was using a cane for about 3-4 months. And you can't, who said it? Lonnie said, students and others said, students have to see what you can do when you have physical limitations. And which is one reason I say that left-handed people have an advantage in most martial arts.
Mm.
Because most attacks, et cetera, are taught right-handed. And for left-handed people, this is, now you're coming into my favorite side, my left side. But we have to be able to work around our limitations and as much as possible.
Has there ever been an explicit attempt by Budoshin or any one of you, I guess, to highlight how much a disabled person can do using Budoshin techniques? Because it seems like a potentially fertile ground to make people aware, not just of, they can be temporary disabilities or permanent disabilities. It just seems like an audience worth cultivating. And I know we've discussed in the AJA of possibly reaching out to people who have disabilities and talking about how Budoshin's been usable by them, but it can be a sensitive topic because some people don't want to be categorized as disabled. You have to be aware of those sensitivities, but it seems like a fertile topic.
Right.
It is. I think Professor Kirby knows that a couple of my senior students were actually have range of motion limitations. And one young man is he's in a wheelchair, and his upper body is supported when he's back in his chair, but when he leans out, he loses all control. So what does that mean for attack? I mean, defense of different types of techniques. The other young man has cerebral, and he's limited in terms of his gait and his sense of balance. And so when we're teaching with the quote unquote regular students or irregular students, and we do a technique, and he says, and I say, well, this is one way of defense, and he says, okay, but I said, Josh, now you take it, and then Josh is going to create the modification that fits his response, because it's not going to be the same response for someone who doesn't have a range of motion concerns. So it's not necessarily this ingrained in the curriculum per se, but it's ingrained in our philosophy that we're going to work with people where they are in terms of their range of motion limitations. So if it's by birth, by accident, or whatever, just to give everybody a sense of what it could be like if you were in that situation.
Right. I've had students with physical limitations, and you can show the technique how it's supposed to be done. It's nice, it's good, and then you get to the student and they can't do certain. And you have to have how do we come up with a viable workaround that essentially ends up being the same technique, taking the student's physical limitations, or let's say physical constraints, because I don't like the word limitation. There are certain words I don't like. Because we all have, we all have limitations and constraints, but in any case, and work around them rather than saying, well, if you try harder, or if you do, the worst thing to say to a person who has any type of constraint is say, well, if you try harder, because they're probably trying harder than the other students in your class to do things correctly. And it's not a matter of trying harder, it's maybe try differently. Because ultimately, there are many ways to do a technique. And as I've said a long time ago, there may be, in jiu-jitsu, there may be 20 or 30 core techniques, and that's about it. What we spend all our time doing is dealing with all the variations of those techniques, all the different attacks that end up using those techniques. And I don't know if someday someone sat down and cut it down, because I know the denser I have with 800 and some odd notes on 800 some odd techniques and variations, that could be cut down to 20 or 30 core techniques. I have no doubt. But probably will take someone who has a lot of patience to do it. And then we're all stuck. But anyway, okay. Do we want anything else with this?
Sensei, if I may, just for a few minutes here. What I'm listening to this morning, it's everything, every topic that we've discussed so far, it leans toward or is reactionary. We're getting older. Age has its limitations and so forth and so on. There's another side to it that just fun to consider, and that is, rather than being reactionary, to take a proactive stance. Sometimes people say, I'm going to get some exercise, I'll take the stairs. Taking the stairs is not exercise. Exercise is walking regularly or swimming regularly if that's all you can do. Exercise is lifting weights if you're able to, regularly, not now and then, 3 times a week. Eating clean, not just I'm going to skip dessert. No, I'm going to maintain the Mediterranean diet because it's a healthy diet. Taking proactive steps so that we can be more viable longer and also improve our current condition by being proactive. We're made to move, and I know that I'm as guilty as anybody of being sedentary for too long. To the extent I stay on a program of stretching, not just basic stretches, but a series of mini stretches as a warm-up, a regular workout using weights, walking or running, depending on what we're able to do, and eating well. We can improve our situation as we age, and even if we have already developed some limitations. If we have a shoulder issue, then we can run or walk. If we have a knee issue, then we can swim. Find that which you can do that makes us move, and we can mitigate some of the age-related limitations to a certain extent, to a varying extent, but something worth mentioning because it takes us out of the victim of being experienced or aged and into the area of here's what I personally can do about my situation. We can't do something about some of our medical conditions because they've happened and they're not reversible. But some of the aging issues we face are reversible simply by finding ways to move our bodies.
Right.
Be less sedentary, if you will.
Yeah, I think what you said in terms of it's not what we can't do any longer, but what we can do, and to use what we have to maintain our mobility as much as possible.
I love it. I took 3 paragraphs. You took 1 sentence.
No,
Well done.
you summarize a lot of things that we've been talking about for the past 45 minutes, and you put it down into 3 paragraphs, and okay, I made it into 1 sentence. But the thing is that the key is to find out, it's like anything else in life, to find out what you have, what assets you have, what can you use, and to use them, because sometimes what you can do can overcome what you can't do.
Beautiful.
And a large part of it, I think, is up here, your attitude towards yourself, okay, in life. And because I see many people who set up their own limitations, and they end up getting stuck by themselves. I have a relative who's essentially back in the 1950s, and chronologically, he's a couple of years younger than I am. But I mean, it's really sad because he's not a dumb person. He's just, that's where he is, and I don't know what you can, it's, how do you say, it's your attitude that determines what you can do with what you have. And I think as long as, and we all of us here, I'm sure have a positive attitude, because otherwise, and we're different ages, different backgrounds, but we're still doing essentially what we enjoy doing. And that at least to me is part of the key to having a happy life, is being, and if you can't do those things, find maybe other similar things that will still bring you satisfaction. And now I've talked too much.
One quick jump in.
Yeah.
So this is Gary. Hey, the left side of my hand was chopped off. My wrist is wrecked, my elbow's wrecked, my shoulder's wrecked. I never let anybody know. And I don't let me know it's wrecked either. That's all.
Okay. Well, I think what you're saying is, if you know your physical limitation, you know what you can do with that arm, leg, or whatever other body part, and what you can't. And you'll find you'll use that quote unquote disabled or effective body part to the best of your ability. If you're in a street situation, you're not going to worry about a sore arm. Okay. If all your left arm can do is come up and block a hit, it's been successful. Okay. And that I think is, something, we all have to realize, that just because we have a physical limitation, it doesn't cripple us. And never use that word around someone who has physical limitations. It's a really bad word to use. Okay. Our second topic, let's go on to the second topic here. Just anybody have anything else that they want to deal with?
Well, it's just something that's inspirational, might be worth sharing. There's a man from Cleveland, Ohio named Walter Oka, who's the father of one of the students in our dojo, who came down periodically. At age 57, he discovered self-defense, martial arts. He was so smitten with it that the particular item was Aikido, that his nickname was Buddha because he was so round. He took up running to lose weight so he could get better at Aikido. And in the mid 70s, because he'd done a lot of running, he ended up with knee replacements, one at a time, but he'd had both knees replaced. at age 80, he was still putting me on the ground when we sparred. And I once did a hand throw on Walter in a demonstration to my class. And he came out of the hand throw doing a flip side fall. Now he's ideal weight now from his running and his diet and so forth. But at 80 years old, he was doing flip side falls. And I'm going, double knee replacement. I did not see him coming out of that hand throw that way. And when he did, I was aghast and I was inspired. Guy went through life with a permanent smile on his face. And he's in his late 80s now. And what can I say? That's inspirational to think that he can do what he did and what he continues to do. He loves teaching classes. And so I draw a lot of inspiration from somebody like Walter to think, wow, you know, we all have 80 to look forward to.
I'm not that far away.
So for what it's worth.
Yeah, Lonnie, I'm 77. So.
That's it. No way.
So, Gary, you want to reveal your age? I know you're talking on the phone here. Okay, anyway.
Hey, 67, 68 in a couple weeks, thereabouts. Ain't as young as I used to be. I'm not as good as I once was, but I'm good as once as I ever was.
Okay, I think, like I said, I think a lot of our success is determined by our attitude, and as long as you have a positive attitude about what you're doing, you can do it a lot. You can do it a lot longer, because as you know, as Dave said, you may have limitations, but you find ways to go around them, rather than seeing them as barriers to future growth.
Sensei, one other thing probably worth mentioning is that my students are mostly teenagers and people in their 20s. There are some people in their 30s and 40s, but and a couple of years back, they went on a tirade. They wanted to find out how old I am. And they started to ask, and then they started to push and so forth. And I kept saying, I'm as old as my tongue and a little older than my teeth. I would give them all kinds of different different answers. And finally, I made them guess, and then I came clean about my age. And it was interesting because what I experienced for the first time in my life is what people call ageism. All of a sudden, a number of them looked at me a little differently because I was about 10 years older than they thought I was. You say age is only a number. Well, when they realized I was old enough to be their grandfather, not their father, then there was a change. There was a change in I don't know, demeanor, and I was taken aback just in a couple of them. But I realized, you know what? I'd have been wiser to stay with my first answer. I'm as old as my tongue and a little older than my teeth.
Well taken.
Kids occasionally, even in the classroom or on the mat, I was as open with my kids as I could be. And I know they'd say, well, I was still teaching, and I think I was at 2020, I'd be 7. They'd say, how old are you? They say 76. They say, you're 76? You're still teaching? You don't look 76. I said, great.
You're living the dream, Sensei.
Living a dream. But I think a lot of it is our attitude towards ourselves and others, and that really determines how, for lack of a better phrase, it determines how old you are. And most people, I think, if you're active in any physical activity, you keep it up as long as you're breathing. You'll find a way to, do what you love to do. and because that's so important for your mental, emotional, physical well-being. Okay. Let's see what else we got here. The second topic is number 5, which is comparing Budoshin with Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do. I think that's what JKD refers to. Am I correct? Okay. And take what's useful, discard what's not. I feel that's mostly true for the general practitioner, not so much for the teacher. Teacher should be able to teach a technique despite it's not being useful to you. For you as a student, you may find a new favorite technique. Is the person here who had that topic, submitted that topic? So I don't even know how to respond to compare Budoshin with Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do, because I have no really cross-reference to it. And without that person here, it's kind of like if we're all dentists and we're going to discuss podiatry. It ain't gonna work. I guess the question that's in here is, do we teach techniques that, I mean, you have students and they may say this technique is, and I've had students say, what is this technique good for? Have any of you, or what is this move good for? Or, have any of you run into that issue, or nobody attacks that way anymore? Or have any of you run into questions where you're teaching a technique and there's students that are saying or inferring that it's not realistic or anything of that sort? Some people are nodding their heads, some people are just rolling their eyes, and some people are, Chris, who has not said a word, is just smiling now.
20 seconds. We taught this technique. It was a kata, right? And the student said, a young woman, she said, why are we doing this? Why do you do this stuff? And she didn't understand. I said, it's a monkey style groin attack. And she was a little off put by that was what it was.
Well, I can understand that, but I think the terminology that was used was probably more offensive than what she was concerned about.
I think
I would just use what Hal Broshitz would say. It's a testicle grab. I mean, you have to be. I think that's part of the problem with some of the terminology that comes out of the martial arts, is that some of it is so, I don't know what the, do monkeys actually do that? You have to, you have to be straight up with people.
Yes, you do. And someday I'll tell you about the actual monkey attack.
But anyway, I mean, that's why when I taught self-defense or counter-assault training, I didn't teach a front snap kick, and there are some self-defense instructors who are still teaching it for, if someone grabs you, you do a snap kick to the front of that private area, for lack of a better phrase. And I would just ask my students, how many of you know how to play kickball? Or how many of you have played soccer? How do you, and most of them would raise their hand. I said, you know how to kick? I said, fine. You just go right up the person's crotch. Okay. You'll do some damage. And you have to find times, because some people won't want to do certain techniques because not culturally proper. And you have to find a way to get them around that. On one hand, you can spend a lot of time dealing with the philosophical issue. Is it the right thing to do or not the right thing to do or whatever, you know? And the other thing is you just deal with the reality and say, well, you know how to do this. That's why you played soccer or kickball as a kid, so you can learn to defend yourself. Lonnie.
There was a, you know, the early martial arts series. This guy was a judo guy. He had a karate book. I mean, he had several of these kind of books, right? But one thing, and of course, when you're accumulating books, you sometimes you get books because of the title and all that. But he was an early guy in the 1950s in terms of. But he had this matrix where it was like he had, you know, Aikido, blah blah blah, and then they had this like kind of like a chart that nexus where the interconnections were into all of the boxing, boom, you know, stance and kind of reverse punch and stuff like that. But it was, you know, it was a good piece if someone had to describe, you know, describe the difference. So I always look at it when someone says, "What do you think of mixed martial arts?" I said, that's a different, because, you know, there's a politics side of that too. I said, well, you know, in terms of mixed martial arts in self-defense, I mean, no mixed martial art as a sport, you know. So I try to qualify it like that before I even attempt to answer something like that. But I'm definitely going to avoid, you know, saying this is absolutely I will not use the word bad or it doesn't work or whatever right here. I just said, well, you know, what's the situation? What's the context? You know, let's look at some similarities. Are there any similarities here? You know, I try to go to that without disqualifying the whole technique or whole system. When someone asks me about, you know, what do you think of, or which system, or which is better? You know, like all the examples on I guess social media, whatever it says. Well, you know, Godzilla versus so and so. You know, got the poster fighting. You know, Bruce Lee fighting so and so.
Lonnie, are you talking? I think you're talking about Bruce Tegner's book right here.
Yes, that's it. That's what I was talking about. Yeah,
it's a great little book. He's got a few out, but yeah, he's got that chart in it. It's called Bruce Tegner's Complete Book of Jiu-Jitsu.
I think I've got it somewhere. I'm not sure where, but I think that's
those early books. Yeah, early library pieces.
Picked up on jiu-jitsu, martial arts. And I think that formed the basis in probably a couple of my books that was done in much greater detail using the chart from Tegner. One of my black belts did that. Maybe Michael Language, I'm not sure. One of the things, just as a side issue, one thing if you're going back to Gensho for yourself is if you have either creative students or students that involve them in making your densho, because sometimes they may have a better way of presenting information than you do. And it's number one, and if you use their information, give them credit, because people love getting credit for stuff. Especially if it's something that's printed, because then they can go around to their friends and relatives, say, I'm in this book. And that's one reason why whenever I've written a book, I thank everybody who's involved. I mean, it doesn't even matter how remotely, because you have to do that. You have to do it regardless of whatever profession you're in. You need who you can help people. So anyway, I forgot what we were into. Lonnie, can you give a very loud PI?
The sound is going out. I'm sorry.
I said, can you give a really loud PI and scare everybody away? No, you shouldn't do that. Anyway, okay, I think the last thing we were on was some of the things we teach are not, the students do not necessarily perceive as being useful. And I've had that problem with my students when there's certain techniques or moves in my densho that I teach that, you know, like reaching for the $10 bill or reaching for the $1 bill. The students, it's really difficult to get them to understand the concept of why they're doing that. And it's almost impossible to explain. I mean, it's just, it's been very frustrating to me because the technique for the, I guess, person's at your side and they're grabbing your wrist from the, he's on the right side and he's grabbing my wrist. And if you just take a step forward and maybe kneel down and reach for that $100 bill or $10 bill, that person's going to move forward. They may not get thrown, but they're going to get moved forward. On the other hand, if you try and pull their arm, the move will never work. And then you have to realize, well, if this technique doesn't work to throw, now what do you go into? Because now this person who is grabbing your wrist is off balance. And what can you do from that position? And it's many students, to teach that simple concept is very difficult. And they're not going to get it until they actually do the complete technique correctly. And then sometimes you can go back and say, okay, now what was the first thing you did? And they'll say, well, I reached forward. And I'll say, and what happened? Oh, the guy was off balance, you know, and now you've accomplished what you originally intended to do, but it took 3 weeks of instruction to get the student to understand the concept. And so sometimes I think what we do is we will teach a technique first and just tell the student, you go through the movement and do it. And then afterwards, we can explain what happened in the technique and why it worked for them. Because once they've applied it and it works, then they can see the relationship, or how I say, they can understand the concept that makes the technique possible. So maybe sometimes to make techniques more relevant to students, it's just a matter of teaching the technique first, and then once they quote unquote get it to some degree, you can then explain the theory behind it, and it's easier for them to accept. Because what's a fault that all of us have as jiu-jitsu instructors that I'm doing now?
You're talking.
What?
Is it talking? That's all you're doing?
Yes, I'll talk too much.
Very funny. How do you know when a lawyer is telling a lie? His lips are moving.
He's speaking, yeah.
How do you know what?
How do you know when a lawyer is telling a lie?
How?
His lips are moving.
His lips are moving.
But since I've already jumped in, so my first really great teacher, Master Hua Chung, he taught police judo in Korea. Right, police judo is the old style, right? Kano jiu-jitsu. And he came over and taught, and then after a year, he got all of us around and said, why did you take this class? Why did you spend a year here? And every student had a completely different reason why they wanted to. And so I think us as teachers, we've got to listen to and understand what the students understand and how to talk to them.
Okay. Yeah. You have to come at students from where they're at. I've seen teachers on the mat in the classroom that are they're on a different planet, and and the students are just, what is he talking about? And you have to be in touch with your students. It's like I said, if you're a dentist, if you're going into a discussion on podiatry, you need to do some reading before you stick your foot in your mouth. Anyway, thank you, Gary. I'm sure there's some footnotes there somewhere. Take care, Chris.
I just wanted to jump in. Yeah, I have to run. I have a 10 o'clock class I have to run and teach. But, a lot of this kind of ties in, as you guys know, I like to listen. And you had a good conversation going. A lot of this ties into, the question everybody started with, and it's about limitations and things like that. So I don't know if this helps, but the way I've always pursued it and the way I teach now is I use techniques as tools. They're just tools. It's what we're trying to accomplish, right? So if the objective is to get out of the way, if the objective is to redirect force, if the objective is to negate the force, depending on your circumstance and what you're trying to do, then from there, it's what tool or tools are best going to help me accomplish that. And sometimes it changes on the fly, depending on what the person does or doesn't do, or changes the way they do things, or somebody else jumps in the mix. So being familiar with your tools and being able to tap into it, that's where it's at. But the objective doesn't change. The objective is still not to get hit, or not to get choked, or, whatever the case is. And we're always either evading, we're redirecting, to some other end, or we're negating, where this may get more into like a law enforcement thing, military thing, or even sports. You have to tap somebody out. But not everybody has a need to do that. For the average person, it's just to stay safe. And so the technique fits into that, and so does now your limitation. So usually when I show something, this is what you need to do out of the way. This is kind of the strategy to redirect. This is the strategy to negate the force. And here's some of the techniques that would apply. And then I would say, now, if you had one arm that you couldn't use, this is how you would apply it. This is the variation of it. If you couldn't, bend down, this is how you would do it. If you were much shorter, this is how you would do it. So it's the same concept and maybe even the same technique, but different ways, because you don't have to be older and limited to have those limitations. It depends on your circumstance. Well, if you got a baby in your hand, or something, or you've been, it's an attempted kidnapping situation and one of your hands is tied or both are tied, are you going to say, I don't have a technique for this? You can't do it that way. It's about, what am I trying to accomplish? What's in my toolbox and how can I adapt it? Now with that, with taking things, that are more useful and stuff, everything can be useful, right? If you think of a toolbox, you have your, let's call them the main tools. You got your screwdriver, your hammer, your pliers, okay, and maybe a saw. But then there's like probably hundreds of specialty tools, if you're into that kind of stuff, whether you're mechanic, woodworking, whatever, electronics. Most people will never use those specialty tools because what they have a need for, the basic tools accomplish that. Until they have that need, something fell down somewhere and you don't have a tool to get to it, or it's some weird corner or something like that. So the average person, I think, can get by with basic techniques and basic things like that. And that's where I see the mindset coming in. Well, this other thing, which we would maybe think of more of a specialty tool, is not as useful, because for them, it's not. either they haven't come across that situation that they don't have a need for, because they can only interpret things from their perspective. You're trying to share your perspective, which may be far beyond and more comprehensive, than what they've ever encountered or maybe ever will. So what you do is, then the way I answer those things, usually I don't get a lot of those requests, because usually I demonstrate it, effectively, and but when I do, usually it happens at seminars and things like that. I put them in that situation where their main tools, don't work or are limited. So now they can see the need for a specialty tool, and i.e. that technique that they thought wouldn't work. So there is value in it, but it may not be as valuable to them on a regular basis. But it doesn't mean the technique doesn't work, or that technique isn't good, or there's no need for it. And so when we look at sport type of martial art, that's what's happened, right? They've stuck with their, you take judo even, there's a lot more techniques that are in some, jiu-jitsu curriculums, but it's not in judo anymore, because they're not going to be in those situations. It's a fixed arena, it's one-on-one, and there's rules, associated what they have to accomplish. So those other techniques to them are not useful, but it's not useful to them. It doesn't mean they're not useful techniques for somebody that maybe a cop, maybe, special forces, maybe, God knows what, that they have those needs. So that's kind of, my perspective on it. And so whether you have limitations by circumstance or, age or whatever the case is, you don't need to be limited. You just alter the way you do it to accomplish the same thing. I think a lot of the limitation, as people get older, even as I get older, sometimes there's things that you want to do, there's things you don't really want to do. Your thinking changes a little bit, your interest may change a little bit or a lot. and so, so sometimes we tend to tailor our workouts based on where we're at, in life. So therefore, maybe let's just say limiting ourselves, and over time, if you don't do those things, then it becomes a real limitation, because you've lost the flexibility in this area, or you lost the strength in another area. So some of it, may be self-created depending on our needs. So I think it's very important, if we're in a teaching role or really any type of leadership role, to always think about what does my audience need? What do my students need? And tailor things based on what they need and how they're best going to absorb that, and try to kind of fight maybe what you want to do or not want to do. You have to put yourself second and meet their needs first, and find the best way to do that. And I think it's kind of neat too, because it really causes you to be creative, because we know how to work around our own stuff, but to try to work around other people's needs, that's what brings out the creativity. So like many of you, I've had people with no legs. I've had people with, Down syndrome. I mean, I've had everything, and I never say no to anybody. And I have them go through the curriculum, the same curriculum that we use for everybody else, but I tailor it based on what they can do. So all I want is that person's 100%, and sometimes they think they're more limited than they are, and as a teacher, you see that, so you push them to do more. But that's really what it is. If we want it to be accessible to everybody, and really to ourselves in the future, if we have limitations, you just have to have the attitude and promote the attitude of, I want your 100% of you, not the 100% I defined in a curriculum 20 years ago. It's here's the curriculum, here's the technique, or here's the kata, whatever it is we're teaching. And that's what I expect, to do here. So if you can't put a choke around somebody with your hands, can you do it with your legs? Can you do it with your belt? Can you do it with your gi? Can you do it with some object around you? I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And ultimately, isn't that what we're teaching? An adaptable martial arts that can be adapted to those unforeseen circumstances in life. That's what they do in the military. Our special forces and stuff go through extensive training, but they still don't know what they're necessarily going to walk into when they're deployed, because the intelligence is always limited, right? So you train based on the intelligence you have, and then you train them to be flexible to adapt to whatever they're going to run into. And that's how they're able to survive, their ability to adapt based on their core training, not for training for every possible outcome, under the sun. So anyway, I do have to run. I apologize. It's good. It's always good conversation. Probably should have jumped in sooner, but it was good listening to everybody.
Just want to thank you for an exceptional summary. I think you segued both topics together beautifully, and I really want to compliment you. I was kind of concerned that you weren't saying anything for so long, but
I didn't want to interrupt because there was good conversation. So it helps me get a good perspective too. And, anyway, have a good weekend, guys. Great seeing everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate you.
Bye-bye.
Chris.
okay, we have 3 of us left. We want to go on, or we want to call it a day, and save the other topics for next time. And I'll let you two make a very important policy decision.
I'm good saving for next time if Dave is.
Same here.
That wasn't a question.
Fair enough.
I was going to cut us down to just one topic next month, but we've got 4 topics here that we haven't touched on already, and we rarely get through 2 or 3 topics. I have no problem staying with 2 times a month. Do you think it's worthwhile to stay at 2 times, or should we cut it down to 1, or what are your thoughts?
I'll be here if you do it twice. I'll just put it that way. This is a great
Same
benefit
here.
to me. Yeah.
Same here.
Okay, so I'll do that, and I hope to get this up a little online a little later today. And anyway, I just had too many Zoom meetings this week, and
My hand hurts. I took 2 pages of notes while Chris was talking.
he does have, one reason I like to have him here, he does have the unique ability to just stand or sit back and then kind of bring things together at the end.
Beautiful.
And I've had students do that in the classroom. They do a much better job than I do, and that's why I said you have to listen to your students. It's amazing what they can bring to whatever you're doing, and if you comment them or compliment them, you have won them over. They'll be there next time. Anyway, so
Teaching is always reciprocal. And we teachers, longtime teachers, we owe our students a debt of gratitude, because if we're paying attention, they've taught us a lot through the years.
yes, they have. Yes, they have.
Yes.
Anyway, so why don't you have a good weekend, and we'll bid our adieus. We'll be back on the the first Saturday in August, whatever that is.
Great.
2 weeks from today. Yeah.
2 weeks from today, and we'll continue on. And if you have any additional topics you'd like to have thrown into the mix, I don't know if I'm going to survey people again as to how they want to prioritize stuff, because that didn't work. But you try stuff, and
That's right. That's right.
It was a fun exercise for some of us.
I enjoyed it. Yeah, that's right.
it'd be worthwhile. But I guess enough people didn't think it was worth the hassle. Anyhow, of course, I only asked those people that had confirmed they were going to be here today, so that may have been part of it too.
And since they, in all fairness, some people may not have checked their email in time, you know?
Possible too, yeah. Yeah. So
All right. See you guys soon. Thanks so much.
take care. Have a great rest of the weekend.
Thank you, gentlemen. Take care.
Thank you.